Connecticut and Massachusetts, Z&M Homes buys houses. Sell your property to the local guys.
Needs repairs, updates, maybe foreclosure or inherited? No problem. We gotcha. Google or add us on Facebook at ZANDMHomes.com.
It's Baxie's musical podcast.
Resistance is useless!
Okay, I need you to bear with me for a little bit, because I'm about to bulldoze my way into some shameless fanboy territory. As you know, I never shy away from talking about my favorite bands, and today is going to be one of those days. For as long as I can remember, I have been a huge fan of the band Killing Joke. Since 1979, Killing Joke has been arguably one of the most intense, most powerful, and perhaps one of the most intimidating bands in the world. This is a band that is tribal, cerebral, visceral, and volatile as hell. And I cannot tell you how many times I've gone back to the Killing Joke well, where I'll pull out their debut album or their 1981 follow-up, What's This For? Or 1985's Nighttime, or 1990's Extremities, Dirt, and Various Repressed Emotions. Each one just devastating. And in my compulsive need for completionism, Killing Joke is among those bands that has not released a single record that I don't have, and that's a fact. It's a band that's been cited by Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, Nirvana, Metallica, Nine Inch Nails, and many others as being hugely influential. In fact, in 2003, Killing Joke released a self-titled album featuring Dave Grohl on drums, and it's a freaking beast. My guest today is original bass player Youth, also known as Martin Glover. Youth is not only a founding member of Killing Joke, he's also one of the most sought-after music producers in the world. After leaving Killing Joke in 1983, Youth would go on to work on projects with the likes of Pink Floyd, Guns N' Roses, U2, Kate Bush, Susie and the Banshees, INXS, Crowded House, and dozens of others, including the biggest hit of his producing career, 1997's Grammy-nominated international hit, Bittersweet Symphony by The Verve. He was also involved in an experimental project in 1993 called The Fireman, which combined rock and electronica, and his partner in that project was Paul McCartney of the Beatles, a collaboration that yielded 3 terrific albums until 2008. But yet it's been Killing Joke that's been a central part of his musical career, returning to the band several times, but rejoining permanently in 2010 following the death of bass player Paul Raven, the very guy who replaced him in 1983. And in rejoining Jazz Coleman, Geordie, and Big Paul Ferguson, the band's original lineup has released 3 albums, which are arguably some of the best and most powerful recordings of their entire career. I think what I'm trying to tell you is that he is not only the real deal, he's the freaking bass player in Killing Joke. This is my conversation with producer Martin Glover, Youth, from Killing Joke on Baxie's Musical Podcast. How you doing?
Very good, thanks. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
That's better. Yeah, not bad. Just a bit of running around. Sorry, I'm late.
Don't you worry about a thing. It's great to talk to you.
Yeah.
Hey, I need to thank you very much for that email. That was very, very cool. A couple of days ago, you sent an email, and I'm glad you got a chance to listen to an episode or two. To hear the feedback from a guy like you is really awesome.
Well, that was outstanding. I mean, I've heard a couple since, and actually they were really good. The Paul Wexler one was excellent. But that Carlos Alomar one, I sent it to a couple of friends. And, I mean, just what he goes through in that. And he's so, like, machine gun about it. He's so fast, isn't he?
Yeah,
but,
he is.
In fact, I was talking about it last night to a friend because I was saying, the bit where he goes on about fame, and he came up with a riff, and he said he nicked the riff from somewhere, didn't he? And my friend said, "Oh no," because I said, "Yeah, I think he got a writer credit on Fame," and he said, "No, that's a James Brown riff." I said, "I think that's where he nicked it." I can't remember. Can you remember where he got it from?
It's so funny to hear how the humility in his personality and the humble nature of the guy. It's really phenomenal.
Yeah. Outstanding.
Yeah.
Outstanding. Just want to settle into this. I want to because you've really raised the bar on that one. So I'm like, I got to be on my toes.
No, listen, I am so excited to talk to you. I mean, to be able to talk, about your career as a producer alone is thoroughly mind blowing. But to talk about Killing Joke with someone who has been Killing Joke, it's like, where do you even start with that? It's like one of those bands that I always find myself going back to. If I need like some ass kicking in my life, I go to Killing Joke. I've had a bad day at work, I go to Killing Joke. Maybe not outside the gate of that spoken word record, but everything else just has completely landed on me for forever. And to talk to you about it is a real honor. So I appreciate you being open to do it.
No problem.
One of the amazing things, and I don't know if it gets talked about enough, is I think Killing Joke is maybe one of the few bands in history that has become more intense and punishing the older you guys have gotten. That doesn't happen with anybody. I mean, you guys are all at the age now where, after all this time, you start to slow down and the intensity drops through the floor, but that has never been about what Killing Joke is about. Tell me about that, because I find it really interesting that you guys have just amped the game up over the years.
Well, I mean, that's a huge compliment and affirmation. I appreciate that. Thank you. I think because we're aware of our legacy, maybe, and we're aware that that legacy only gets more relevant as we go through time, and the world becomes more the way it is, more difficult. That relevance makes it feel worthwhile in a way, because when we were making those records at the time, late 70s, early 80s, people thought we were sort of a bit pessimistic or something. We always thought we were just honest, you
Right.
know. But now people just wouldn't say that. They'd just say, "Oh yeah, that's." But I think it's we try and make music of its time, So wherever we're at, where we're at, where the world is at, that informs what we're doing. So I think because the world's got more intense and there's more, untruth and more war and more manipulation and more control, more regulation, more restrictions, that makes it more poignant for us to sort of go harder and heavier. I think it's like it's a strange parallel. But funnily enough, when we start, people would take a lot of acid at our gigs. We were known as a psychedelic band. I mean, in the same way, I suppose a lot of people would have taken acid to the Doors back in the day,
Right.
even though they were a darker band. Maybe not Sabbath, but the Doors, but probably Sabbath as well, actually. But and that psychedelic element, I feel, is often sort of people don't get it, or they don't focus on that. They focus on the harder, more brutal side of the band. But there's the psychedelia in it is kind of what makes it medicine to us,
Yeah.
in terms of what the functionality of it is. And it's being able to sort of swallow that poison, throw it up, and become stronger for it. I sense.
One of the other things that's is amazing to me is you were 18 years old when you joined this band with Jazz and Paul and Jordy, and you all have very individualistic, powerful personalities and points of view. That's very, very clear. But there's this bond that runs between the four of you, musically and spiritually and psychedelically or whatever it may be. And it's something that you carved out almost from the very beginning. Tell me a little bit about that, because sometimes bands need time to find their voice, and it sounds like you guys found the voice within like the first 15 minutes of playing with each other.
It's so bizarre. I was saying that the other day, that some of the best music I made when I was a teenager. Didn't know what I was doing. So I don't know what that is. With Killing Joke, yeah, four very, very different alpha males. Four bulls in one pen. Not a lot of friction. I think the rub of that is where a lot of the magic is, and where also a lot of the unity and the harmony comes from the resilience of those opposites colliding. And it's in that respect, it's never been easy for us, but at the same time, it's almost effortless when it does happen. It takes us all by surprise, and it just comes out. All of us individually are equally surprised by it, and then that's the magic to it. It defies a kind of intellectual, examination of it. I mean, I know jazz just doesn't bother, but there are points where we meet, and they're unusual points, like disco. We all love disco. But there are opposites as well. Geordie and myself, we love 60s, 70s pop. Whether it's smoky or even sort of loungy, sort of easy listening stuff. Whereas jazz absolutely hates anything pop. And Paul also, jazz just doesn't like much music other than his own. Generally, he likes a bit of funk, and that's about it.
Yeah.
Paul's very much more of a hard rock metalhead, and doesn't listen to much else. I mean, he does. He likes quite a lot of world music actually.
Okay.
We share that taste, but and he likes a bit of disco, but we all have very different tastes, but they eclipse. Where they eclipse is where that kind of weird chemistry comes from, I suppose. So when I'm with them, when we're working and writing, I always try and include those opposite elements, because I sense that's what we are. Even though whenever we did that in the past, at the beginning, I always thought nobody would get Killing Joke. I was surprised it connected, because it was sort of genre blind, and it was juxtaposed opposites, disco and metal and punk and post-punk. I just thought, it's only us who will get that. But actually, people loved it, and I think even more so now. So I try and keep an eye on keeping those weird opposites in there somehow. Nevertheless, some people with Killing Joke, we each take the sort of lead baton sometimes, and when that person's pushing, the disco may get ignored, or something else might, or vice versa.
To me, it's kind of like an extended Venn diagram. There's four circles, and everything kind of meets all in the middle, and that small little pocket, that's what Killing Joke does. And I think, as a fan, for me, I think what separates all of that from, you talk about the genre part of it, is Killing Joke does kind of defy all of that, because it really is so much of its own thing, and it's a sound that no one has been able to replicate, an atmosphere that no one's been able to replicate.
Yeah, well, Jazz is very good with a bad vibe, I must say. He's one of the great frontmen, and he can express his terror and fear and paranoia very articulately. Paul generally helps him with the lyrics, but between them with the lyrics, Jazz can really inhabit that character and personality and project it very well. And it is, it is quite special and unique, and it's very emotional, so, it doesn't, often what we do, it might appear wrong. Someone may present a riff, or someone, we start jamming and we get, and Jazz being, and then we get into it, and then something else happens and Jazz just starts singing, and it's, it's like channeling, or it's very magical. And there is a lot of magical intent there, even though between us, we all have very, very different spiritual expressions, but we always do a little circle before we go on stage. I tend to lead that, but everybody contributes, and all those different things go into the mix. I think what is lovely is we grew up coming up out of West London counterculture. The birth of counterculture in Europe was kind of Ladbroke Grove in the 70s, and we grew up in a very multicultural city, London, West London. When I was at school, St Augustine's, West London, white people are in the minority by far more Jamaican, West Indian, and Indian cultural backgrounds, and so in that climate, disco, reggae, black music became more of our soundtrack in many ways. So the band reflects that within our disparate personalities. We're also different and opposite. Yeah, we can accept that, and we can support each other's differences, and we can get unity with ourselves by including all that. Rather, people find in politics, whatever, unity comes from them forcing their idea on everybody else and everybody else agreeing with it. We grew up in a culture where multiculturally we could do all those things and celebrate the differences. And that, I think, is very important today, politically and personally, because the world needs more unity and harmony. There's the politics of today is very divisive and very, consciously divisive. And we've got more separation and loneliness than ever before. So things that pull us together, music is, one of the best things of doing that. You're bringing people together and getting everybody to see, we're all the same, really. And we're more, jazz is quarter Indian as well. So we're a multi-ethnic band. That was very rare in those days. And all of that, I think, is kind of amped to the extreme within the circle of the band.
I understand what you're getting at because, I know here in the States, the division between, people here is so divided, and that conversation, collaboration, it almost seems like a lost art. And to have, such different, points of view and personalities, and then to still be able to do it, that's not something you'd find very often here in the U.S. And I would assume probably in Great Britain too, that everyone is just kind of, focused on their own opinion and applying that to everybody else.
That's why great bands split up. They become successful, and then they don't have to have an argument with the drummer about which direction the song goes in or whatever. They can just do it their own way. But often it's a law of diminishing returns, and there's only a handful of artists that I can think of that have transcended and exceeded the achievements they made with the bands they became famous with.
Yeah.
I mean, not even Mick Jagger can do it on his own. McCartney can, but not Mick Jagger.
Right.
Yeah, very few people can.
I just rewatched the Death and Resurrection Show documentary.
Oh my God,
that came out about 10 years ago. I've probably seen it like 2 or 3 times already. But the story of the formation of the band is somewhat legendary, and Jazz and Paul used ancient rituals and ceremonial magic to kind of bring you guys together. When you joined the band, did you have any sense of skepticism about that, or did you believe that there was something larger involved?
Oh, I was totally skeptical. I'm without getting too spinal tap about it, but I'm the earth element. I'm the Capricorn in the band. So my role at that point was to be a sardonic, cynical element to the, mysticism of Jazz and Paul, especially at 18, 19. And, because I was really the only Londoner in the band.
Mm-hmm.
So the other guys were a little bit provincial, I thought. Jazz still had a feather in his beret, and I had to style Geordie, cut his hair off and bleach it. And I was kind of like, fully immersed in punk at that point.
Right.
So, yeah, I was very cynical. But then I started taking a lot of psychedelics, and culminating in 21 in 1982 of sort of having this meltdown on the King's Road, having a full Sid Barrett, burning money on the road in a kimono. I was arrogant. I thought I was a bit too middle class and normal to ever lose it.
Yeah.
And I was really into Jim Morrison and the Doors. I thought, there's no way I'm going to do a Jim Morrison. It's just, I could take buckets of acid, it wouldn't make any difference. Just too normal. And I was very cynical about spirituality or anything. I was like really nihilistic in many ways. And but this acid meltdown I had ended up me being in a mental hospital for 2 weeks. and having the spiritual awakening, coming out of that, tapping into sort of other dimensions. I don't know, it was some really crazy stuff going on. All the magic suddenly that was surrounding Killing Joke that I'd been taking the piss out of suddenly became real, to the point where I could look at a sewage cover on the street and see these Masonic mystical patterns and be able to put my hands in a certain position, turn a street light off with my mind, and think I could do crazy stuff like that. But actually, in the meltdown, coming out of the hospital, I had two people around me: Brian Barrett, who'd written a book with Timothy Leary, Lee Harris, who'd started the first head shop and Homegrown magazine in London in the 70s. They were both kind of shaman figures, and they would tell me that I wasn't mad. I was going through a shamanic initiation. All shamanic initiations require a sort of wounding in the Joseph Campbell, the hero with 1,000 faces sort of perception. So that was my wounding, and it was a complete ego shredding, and I had to kind of rebuild myself back, and it took a few years. And I became very cautious about it. 10 years later, I'm living in Goa. I had a house in Goa in India, which is a psychedelic community with, liquid LSD from California, a lot of Americans, no rules. And that's where, psychedelic trance emerged from. And I was a pioneer of promoting that and making that. And then I got back into it. And prior to that was acid house in London, where ecstasy had become a big drug, which I dabbled with, but very cautiously. But what it gave me, that breakdown, was a deep spiritual appreciation for nature. And so much so it led me to joining a druid order and studying it, and studying shamanism from the mushroom guide. What it also did, and I was saying this to Jazz recently, is that the thread that runs through Killing Joke throughout, that where the continuity is spiritually, is essentially triple goddess. And triple goddess is a kind of Robert Graves concept. It's been debunked by certain esoteric cultures and scholars, but others appreciate it. But it's this goddess-based, nature-based worship, or not worship, or system. So, and it's very poetic, and it fits with the druid thing. And to me, that's where most of the songs' spiritual heart lay, is in a devotional thing to her. So now that's a radical thing for me to say. I mean, some members of the band may disagree with me, but Jazz agreed with me when I mentioned it recently.
Well, there's a sequence in the documentary, which I don't know if it leads into that, but it certainly leads into this idea that something else is going on, and all four of you are a part of this in a way where a lot of people might just not be able to understand because they haven't experienced that kind of awakening. But there's this sequence in the film about this gig in the Reading Hexagon back in 1980, where you're like 5 songs deep into this gig, and then all of a sudden something changes or opens up, and you're all having this out of body experience simultaneously. Explain that if you can, because I think a lot of people have a hard time getting it.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I've got my theories on that. This was just before I had the acid meltdown.
Okay.
But I was tripping off my nuts at that point. From the middle of What's This For, through touring that, and then just before Revelations. Revelations was after, but that album has that magic in it. And what I found, like I said earlier, we were a psychedelic band. You go to the toilet at a Killing Joke gig, there'd be guys outside the toilet going acid, speed, hash, and there was a lot of acid at the gigs. And people are horrified when I say that now. The idea of tripping to Killing Joke, but actually it works really well. And I used to take acid a lot on stage because I get bored with doing the same set every night. I'd want a different light show. I just did it just to, I was exploring, experimenting. And at that particular show, and also I was playing the fretless precision, which meant that often I was just slightly under the note or above it, and it gave it a certain dissonance frequency-wise. I think that really added to the magical ritual of it. And some of those weird dissonance bass tones could actually affect the cosmos in that space. And my theory was, when the intensity of the gig got so intense, we go into what we later call whiteout, where it could just go silent, and it would look like everything was in slow motion, and there'd just be this hiss, and then it suddenly go back in really loud, like you're being sucked back into. It was almost like you punctured into a different dimension, but collectively. And what was weird was that the audience and everyone in the band were aware of it. I thought it was just me because I'd been taking acid, but
Yeah.
it wasn't. There are pictures of that Hexagon gig where I look like so calm, like almost like a baby asleep on stage, and there's almost like a riot going on around me. And I was in this state of grace in the center of this storm, and often channeling a lot of this energy, and the earth element rooting it down into the ground. So that's my theory. Yeah.
I think the thing that's so fascinating, well, I think the thing that's so fascinating is if it were just one of you, maybe two of you, you could say, well, then it was just the psychedelics
Yeah.
alone.
Yeah.
But the fact that all four of you simultaneously cite this as having happened.
And the audience felt it
Yeah.
afterwards. And they go, "What was that silent thing?" Everything went weird. That's my only kind of rational explanation for it. Happened again when we went to the pyramids. I had the idea of us recording in the pyramids, and I had a contact through the great mixer Bob Clearmountain. His ex-girlfriend Mary was a white witch in New York, and she managed a power plant, and she had given that up and split up with him and gone to live in Cairo, and had access to these secret chambers under the pyramids, and was doing meditations there with her esoteric group. He gave me a number, and I said, "Can you get us in? We want to do some recording." And she got us in. And it was just me and Jazz and an engineer with some DATs. And but again, time behaved weirdly inside there. The machines, all the DAT batteries, video batteries, drained in 2-3 minutes, and there were 2-hour batteries. Weird mystical phenomena happened. And again, it was a bit like taking DMT, or I think that allowed us to kind of tap into some, I don't know, other dimensions, other energies. Who knows? I have theories, but it was very similar to the whiteout experience. And I think again, there's that intensity of intention that can create the peak experience. I've read a lot of Colin Wilson books. Most of his books are based about the peak experience and how to switch it on and off. And I've studied that in depth, because that's kind of what I have to do with as a producer, is to create the best out of the artists and create these peak experiences that that we can flick on and off with a switch every day. And so he had some interesting ideas about that, but I think an intensity of intention is essential. And of course that's what ritual does. It kind of really solidifies and focuses some of your intention.
To get that peak intention that you're talking about, and then being able to apply it to your career as a producer, I would imagine that, there have to be certain things that you've done to kind of create that in a studio with other artists who may or may not share that same experience. How do you provide that in a studio with other artists, or can you provide it to that degree?
When I'm working as a producer, most of it's subliminal and subconscious, and I might be doing that, but the band may not be aware of it. And there may be an occasion where, even just sitting down to dinner in a circle can be a magical thing, and how you conduct the conversation and discuss intentions and philosophies, it can be just as powerful in some ways. And more on a personal level, I might develop a more personal relationship with the artist, and we'll discuss spirituality and ideas, and that will enter into the narrative and conversation and come into it. But more often than not, it's a subliminal thing, and as it is with Killing Joke, although occasionally we will do, actual, ceremonies. Often when we're on tour in the UK, we'll do a pit stop on a stone circle and do a little circle and ceremony. We used to do it a lot in the early days and take bongos out, take mushrooms, and sit in our old Neolithic burial chamber playing drums with incense, and just, and
Yeah.
we but like I was saying earlier, our own expression of spirituality is very different from each other, but we share certain things, and we can be inclusive and multi faith in that sense, and it doesn't have to be one way or another. Everybody can be involved, and I think what I do when I take artists to my studio, Space Mountain in Andalusia, Spain. We're above this ravine that's like a very narrow gorge, but quite high up, 100 meters, 150 meters, kind of a little tiny Grand Canyon, and it's a real goddess site, and there's a lot of snakes, and there's a little spring and stream but it's incredible. It's like a Roger Dean landscape. It's all been watered. It's fantastic. And I often take the band down there, and we'll walk through that, and that in itself is an initiation. I've realized the connection between environment, geography, land, and your own mental state and the creative process can be often interlinked. Killing Joke often work well in dark, dystopian urban environments, but everybody works well in a fierce nature environment, in the desert or like this, a ravine or something. That will come in and inform the work and become part of that ritual. So it happens like that. I think if I made it really overt and said, look, we've got to do a ceremony before we start, we have to do, smudge the room, I think the bands are often very cynical, like I was when I was a teenager. That would be counterproductive, and it'll be a bit imposing of me and my belief system onto them. I'm not necessarily. I'm trying to apply that system to myself, and hopefully that will help me facilitate their art. So I'm not there to evangelize what I'm into. I won't talk about it unless people really ask me about it.
Yeah.
Because it's a very private, expression. But I'm happy to do that. But I think in the working professional environment, it's better to be kept occult, hidden. Well, not hidden, but not subliminal.
But in any kind of collaboration, though, you still need a certain level of open-mindedness, not only on the artist part, but then your part too, because, I mean, they're the artists. They have their own vision of what they want, and you're there to provide that and to not make them fall apart and go crazy trying to accomplish that.
Yeah, I mean, everyone, every artist needs a different, being open-minded doesn't necessarily go with being an artist.
No, I know. True.
But and most of the time, halfway through an album, I'll ask every member of the band individually, how do you feel the album's going, and what's your vision? And they always go, well, my bass can be louder. Can you turn the drums up? So when they're in the trenches in a band, that's what they're thinking about. My job is to have the further perspective to see the big picture, if you like. But often I'm surprised the artist doesn't, even the main writers will not have a vision of that. Some really do. I just had a meeting with a young band, and they map out their album before they've even written the songs. We need an ambient one to start, big hit single, and a darker one. Some people can do it like that, but most bands don't. They just have a collection of ideas which are half, gone through. And hopefully, the producer will help them get to a point where they're complete and definitive ideas and recorded, and that's a big part of my job, is to help facilitate that. But I'm not like it's my way or the highway. I'll have a vision. Absolutely, I have a vision all the time. But if the job demands that I'm just facilitating their vision or one of the writer's vision, I'll try and do that. I worked with String Cheese Incident years ago, who are like a Deadhead band,
Right.
They'll kick me for saying that a bit, but in that they had a very similar kind of structure, and there were like 5 solo members, they'd all play on each other's songs, but they were definitely each member had their songs, and so then they were all very different as well, and and they all had their own vision for that, and then I was like, look, I don't want it just to be like your American quilt patchwork deadhead thing, because we've heard that a lot. So I was introducing them to sort of emerging electronica of the late 90s, things like, Spangle and what people were listening to in India, taking acid, people who took acid, what they were listening to in Europe.
Yeah.
It wasn't the Dead by then, it was other stuff. And pushing them to include that in to the mix to make them contemporary, and make transcend the kind of ghetto they found themselves in, even though it was but it worked. And the album was the first album they got reviewed in Rolling Stone and Spin, and definitely pushed them into another league, But it's, it's kind of working with all those different visions. That was quite polarized on that one. But, I have to be, in that respect, I have to be the prism that all those lights shine through. And I love that thing Carlos Alomar said on his interview, where there's a sense of obligation and responsibility when you're working with music or being a musician to learn how to do it and do it properly. And, and that's, the same as for me as a producer. My responsibility is to focus all those elements, create a definitive statement that, the band is going to really help the band.
Yeah, I mean, I think of a situation like you had with the Verve. Bittersweet Symphony was a massive international hit. Yeah, and I assume maybe even the biggest hit single that you might have been a part of as a producer.
Sure.
It's impossible to predict how something is going to, land once you've, released it. But when you finish a song like that and, you've helped these guys along, put together the biggest hit of their career, and you play it back after it's finally done, what goes through your head when you hear something like that? Because, when a fan hears that on a radio, they say, my God, what a great hit. But as someone who's in it and really close to it, what was your sense of in that moment of what you had just completed?
Well, that's a good example, because it's never as straightforward or simple as that.
Sure.
I wish it could be, but it isn't. And with that song particularly, the band had split up. Richard had signed a solo deal, re-employed the band as session musicians on his solo album. And that was, for me, one of the biggest songs. But Richard had fallen out with it, didn't like it, and I'd cut it, but he didn't want me to work on it and forbidden me to work on it expressly.
Why was that?
He just fell out. So artists fall out of love with their songs. Often many of the artists I work with absolutely hate the singles that define and become the cornerstone of a 30-year career for them. They still hate it. It's the same with my band. Jazz hates Love Like Blood, just hates it. I have to twist his arm to play it all the time. It's same with 80s, although I can always generally get Geordie on the side of 80s because it's one of his great riffs. But, neither of them want to play them generally. Most of the time I have to really push them. And and I didn't even play on those records, but I love the song. But, often bands like with Embrace, a great British band in the late 90s, I had a big #1 song with them called Come Back to What You Know. And again, Danny just would not, hated the song, didn't want to cut it, didn't want to do anything. And I had to somehow do a weird deal where I said I'd do this other song, which I knew, Good People, which is a great record and everybody loved. I said, I'll only do that if we can Come Back to What You Know as well. And that was one example. I've never had to do that again, but sometimes I do. Or sometimes I just have to use a lot of stealth and cunning, and with Bittersweet, I actually, when Richard wasn't in the studio, I'd pull it out, pull the tapes out and kept tracking it, even put the strings on it, even got it to a really good mix state. And then on a playback with publishers and managers, I said, look, it was all going great and the wine was flowing and everybody was really happy. And I said, I did a bit of work on Bittersweet. Richard, can I give you a blast, see if you like it? It's sounding good. And he was like, yeah. And then, he dropped and everybody went crazy. And, and he fell in love with it again. And and I had to go through a really long process to get it to the point where he really loved it again, for it to even be considered for inclusion. So people don't see any of that when they hear the record for the first. They just hear a classic, timeless record. Many people have put that in the top 10 of the best ever singles every month. But that's what sometimes you have to do. There's that great story of Sound of Silence, Simon Garfunkel. The first time they heard it, they were on tour, and it was #1 in the US and the UK, and they'd never heard or even known about the orchestra going on it. And I think most artists love the idea of that and would love that, but actually these days would be horrified because it would be a complete control issue. That it just wouldn't happen. And these days you don't really have managers or producers that will go those distances and lengths for the art to make that happen. They'll just often just go yes. They'll just be yes men. They don't have the vision of that. So it's a rare thing, and I think it was a rare thing then. So I don't. It's a fifth dimension thing. It's a very hard thing to quantify and articulate, but those songs and those tracks have their own manner, their own mojo. And sometimes when that's super strong, even the author can't stop it. And often with many records, bands I've worked with made great records that again they hated, big hits. It takes them 20 years to work out what it is about that before they start liking it.
It's funny that you bring it up, having worked a number of times with Paul McCartney, a guy who must face that all the time. There must be songs that he's done over the years. We go, oh, geez, I can't believe I gotta sing that horrible freaking song again. But that's a guy who, one of the most profound musical artists in history, must face that constantly. And I've had a chance to listen to a little bit of the Fireman records that you had done with him. Tell me about working with him and the experience of that.
Well, I mean, it's a very different experience than working with a young band on the first album, when
Yeah.
you're working with artists of that caliber. And of course, there's a whole different way of approaching that. George Martin famously said the art production's all about tact and diplomacy. And he's right, because it's the very easy mannered, smooth talking producers that can coax that out of them.
Yeah.
But you still, one of the reasons those records were so good was because their producers were quite tough. And George Martin would be constantly pushing their bar up to make sure the songs were right. As Lou Goldham did with the Stones, and all the other great producers they work with would do the same. There's a great film of the recording of Sympathy for the Devil in Olympic.
Yeah.
Jean-Luc Godard directed, and you see the process of how that comes about. I think Jack Nietzsche is in the room, and Jerry Wexler, is it, or what? Or Miller, I think, was the producer. They came up with the idea. That Charlie Watts got fed up and gone home, and they took over the rhythm, and he played drums on it and got the conga going, and that changed the vibe, and then it became the hit. And it really illustrates, as does the Get Back series.
Oh, I know.
You see people composing and putting together all those songs from just little threads. You can see how those songs have a kind of evolution and a process of distillation before they become these incredible finished classics. Also, I think, when I'm working with Paul, a lot of the time with the Beatles, they work fast. I work fast. I like work fast. I think it's a commitment of confidence to work fast. And I like the way Dylan would work fast and just throw it down. Not to say that I'm not afraid of a bit of crafting and polishing what you get, but the actual performances, you don't want. Music doesn't lie. It's a mirror. If it sounds arduous and torturous and takes forever, that's because it did, and a lot of those great records were made very, very fast and
Yeah.
written fast as well, and that energy, stays in the artifact as manner, as spirit, and
Yeah.
so I have a really great team of engineers that I've trained up personally, so we can work really fast and keep the artist engaged and not bored and inspired and on the edge, and challenging and pushing them all the way, challenging them on the song and the middle eight, the bridge, everything, just making sure everything is there that's supposed to be there. And if there isn't something there that's missing, well, then let's get it.
Yeah.
So that's how we approach it. Now that's controversial because, in the UK you get like it's common for producers to be like that in some ways, but in America, it's much more a corporate. I've worked in America on sessions and stuff where the engineers refers to the producer and the artist as sir, and it's very businesslike. Sort of. Obviously, not all of it. It's a lot more so than like London or something, or maybe not so much now, but then. So I think in that culture, there's culture of, if you want it that way, yes, sir, let's do it that way.
Right.
Whereas if you're in with Trevor Horn here, he'd be going, no, that's terrible. We're not doing it that way. It's got to be this way, and have a
Right.
listen to and and obviously there are great American producers who are pushy like that, but and artists. But I think that's good sometimes. I think great artists need to be challenged. One of my theories why those great artists like McCartney, Stones, AC/DC even don't make great records anymore is because my theory is they don't have managers that have a vested interest. They have managers who are on a big wage of a few $100,000 a year, and they just say yes and make it happen. And when you have managers that, if the record wasn't good and going to sell, they wouldn't get paid. They made sure it worked. It's so easy for people. You can imagine going in with Van Morrison and saying, "Well, I don't think the song's working. Can we try it like this?" He just laugh at you, tell you to fuck off, do another take, and go home.
Right.
There's something amazing about that as well. I love that, but it's kind of finding that balance where there's enough challenge for my responsibilities to the music. I mean, I'm employed by the artist and the label, but my real responsibility is to the music and the song. If I get the music right and everything flows, if I try and just make the label right happy or the artist happy, then it don't work.
Yeah.
You have to have a lot of courage and fearlessness to be able to do that, and you have to have skills in tact and diplomacy to present it in a way that's not going to have Van Morrison to tell you to fuck off.
Well, I think when it comes to like a Paul McCartney, the legend looms so large with that guy that there's probably nobody in his world that doesn't think, "Oh my God, that's Paul McCartney," and he must get that all the time. And to work with somebody who is going to challenge a Paul McCartney, someone who has the bravery to say, "Hey, Paul, why don't you try doing it this way? It'll be so much better." That takes a special kind of thing to kind of get that legacy out of your mind and say, "Here's a guy I'm working with. Let's challenge each other." Can't be too many people in the world that do that.
Not many artists will have the courage to bring that on. But I think with Paul, with work I did with him, he was very clever in that we did it as the Fireman, which was an anonymous group, so he could take off his Paul McCartney hat
Yeah.
and just be Paul or someone else for a minute. and so those considerations that would come into play for a Paul McCartney solo record wouldn't be there, which gave me a lot more freedom and allowed me to direct him in a more experimental way, with him being totally up for that because there was no pressure there. So that was clever. I mean, actually, he told me that's what they did with Sergeant Pepper's. Sergeant Pepper's, it was his idea to be an imaginary band, so they could not be the Beatles for a minute. And yeah, it's so clever. and I think yeah, I mean, more bigger artists should try that. I mean, you can pretend when you're in the studio. So when I'm directing singers when they're doing vocals, I might say, every take I'll give them a different emotional direction. I might say, oh, let's have an angry one, or let's have a vulnerable emotional one. And then I go further. I'd heard that John Hammond, when he was recording Ray Charles once, had got a call to say Ray Charles's mother had died. And he took the phone out to Ray at the piano, and Ray got the news, and John said, "Look, we can cancel the session and do it another day if you want to grieve, no problem." And Ray went, "No, let it roll." And then he made one of his greatest albums ever.
Yeah.
And it became this homage to his mother and the emotional weight of the moment.
Yeah.
So sometimes I might say to a singer, "Oh, imagine your mother's just died and you're singing this song to her. Sing it like that. Do a
Yeah.
take like that." And they'll be like, "What the fuck?" And I could just, because it's like getting your head outside of the box of where you think it is, or and playing,
And you're also trying to extract a performance from them. They're not just
absolutely.
singing into a microphone in a studio. You're looking for the best
Yeah,
emotional response to the music in that moment.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Let me ask you, get back to Killing Joke here for a minute, because I've read and have seen a lot of interviews with Jazz. I've never had the chance to interview him myself, but I always get the sense that he's an incredibly complex figure. On one hand, he's absolutely brilliant, both musically and certainly intellectually, and you combine that with the intensity of his personality and the occasional history of self-sabotage in a way. And at the same time, he's exceptionally charming and disarming at the same time. How do you describe having a relationship with a guy that intense and that complex, and then keep it going for more than just a few days at a time?
Unreal, unreal, surreal, unreal. You nailed it, actually. Yeah, it's as you can imagine, and just articulated, it's got to be a mission impossible. Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult, and it's not just Jazz. We all have self-sabotaging elements in our characters with Killing Joke. We tend to take it in terms. Jazz says I'm worse than him if you talk to him. But I know it's very difficult, and I used to. We all used to just deal with it by being whoever could be the most aggressive and shout the loudest would get their way, or the longest. And it's still like that, actually. But that's okay, because that means if the idea or whatever we're talking about is really that important, then someone will really push for it. And and eventually, if they feel that strongly about it, it will probably happen. So, but it is rare that we agree on anything. And we often go to, great expense to do something, record a show or something, and then just go, "Oh, I wouldn't like that show. I don't want to do it." And the self-sabotaging Killing Joke is unreal, and it's incredible we're still together and still able to work together. I mean, the amount of betrayals and personal stuff that's gone on within us over the years would split many bands up forever.
Oh, I'm sure.
And in a weird way, it's actually bonded us. And like what Carlos again was saying, what my intentions are in life. I want those belly laughs. I want big belly laughs. I don't want blah blah blah. Chuckle chuckle. I want big belly laughs. Make you cry with pleasure and joy. And you only get that from really deep, emotional, honest relationships you have. What's great with Killing Joke is we all know each other so well. We can always be brutally honest. We all have to watch it now because we're a little more older and sensitive, and we can react differently to that brutal honesty. But
Sure.
it's there, but that actually allows you to really be yourself in many ways.
Yeah.
You think it would actually kind of bully you into a corner, but pushes you to come back fighting sometimes, and you get those last. We have some of the best times I ever have had as recently with jazz on tour, you know, and we'll have a really, really great time, and find great humor in things that only we find humor in, and to do it collectively is a great reward and privilege, you know. And
Yeah.
I have to remind the band that when it's tough, when it's going the other way, I have to say, look, we're actually in this amazingly privileged position to be able to be with people that are that honest with each other, you know. Well, it's incredibly challenging, and it's taken me 50 years plus of studying psychology and my own, you know, doing therapy, doing all the spiritual work I could think of. You know, going through the fire many times to be able to be in a room with them and be able to do it and
Yeah.
make that work. You know, it's incredible.
Let me ask you about Jordy here real quick, because I'm one of the people that truly believes that this is maybe one of the most criminally underrated guitar players maybe in history, and the guy for since the beginning has just been a flat out devastating guitar player, and he doesn't get mentioned in the way that some others do. Musically speaking, and having worked with so many great musicians over the years, where do you rank Jordy as a guitar player?
Wow, yeah. I mean, I think Geordie is really top 10, you know, influential, innovative guitarist in the last 50 years. And I think a lot of people do recognize that. He has a devotional following, and a big part of Killing Joke's fan base are obsessed with him. And he has a very unique sound. Then you look at his contemporaries and even some of his heroes, Jeff Beck covering Killing Joke with Johnny Depp recently,
Yeah.
with Alice Cooper. I mean, those are great testaments to somebody's quality. And you know, Nirvana, Nick in our riffs, you know, I mean, and the influential influence of Killing Joke from Ministry to Soundgarden to all over the place is well documented. So I think he thrives on having that acknowledgement,
Yeah.
but being quite indifferent to it as well. I mean, he's not chasing that. He's so Geordie is absolutely one of the most coolest people you'll ever meet.
Yeah.
He's like a character out of a Raymond Chandler novel or something, you know, from a different time and era. But like the rest of us, he can be incredibly self-sabotaging personally and with the band, you know, as much as all of us can,
Yeah.
and be just as difficult as Jazz and me. So, you know, and also creatively, it's very hard once he gets locked into his sound. It's hard to get him to experiment and do different things in the studio. Nevertheless, an incredible writer, an incredible musician, and great guitarist. I
Yeah.
mean, formidable, and was always formidable. Well, for me, joining the band at 18, you know, Jazz had been in orchestras playing violin. Paul was well studied in his drums. Geordie was grade 8 cello when he was 12. You know, I'm all self-taught. So I had to really up my game musically. And I learned so much, and I continue to learn so much from them all.
Yeah.
You know, when I do my solo albums, which are more like 60s psychedelic folk, Jazz gives me advice on how to project my voice, and I'm trying to sound like Nick Drake, and he's going louder, louder.
Maybe Nick Drake needed that kind of encouragement.
Yeah, but even though it's a tough love we have, it is supportive, and we are all on the same side. And it reminds me of there's a new Motown documentary I was watching, the competition between the producers in house and the writers with getting their songs. One producer had done My Girl, and then the next producer said, "Well, I'm going to do My Guy." Barry Gordy was like, he kind of, my brother-in-law, my father, but when he heard it, it was like, yeah, it's going to be, and it was a bigger hit.
Yeah.
And that kind of competitiveness can really up your game. And we have a lot of that within Killing Joke. And Geordie would do a riff, I'm like, God, I have to come up with something better than that, and it just with my bass, I have to come up with great bass lines. Otherwise, Geordie would show me one,
Right.
And so, it's definitely, and it's been a big part of my process and philosophy is to surround myself with incredible musicians and engineers and other people who are incredible talent because it makes me look good, you know. And my job as a producer is to make the band look good. My job as a bass player is to make the guitarist and the singer look good. I get that, you know. And even if you're in that supportive role, it's still a really important and difficult role to fulfill sometimes.
So Killing Joke finished touring a few months ago. There was an EP that came out last year, Lords of Chaos. There hasn't been a new album since 2015 with Pylon. What's the status of Killing Joke moving forward? Is there a plan to record again, or where do things stand?
Do. Yeah, we have a plan to record in September, October, but whether we get to that point and it happens or not, I don't know. We've had many plans to record over the last few years, and it's not happened.
Yeah, you haven't had a good moment of self-sabotage in quite a while.
Oh no, that's not true. Not ones that you're aware of, but I am. I go through emails today that are like eye-wincingly self-sabotaging. And I just have to have a philosophy with Killing Joke. I feel grateful I'm not totally reliant on that band for everything, because then I would be like slashing my wrists in frustration. And if that stuff happens now, I kind of just have to engage in a practice of patience and just let it work itself out.
Of course.
Without, trying to force it. And flow with it and see what happens. And it does happen anyway in its own way. So I'm happy to do that. But I've got like 25 Killing Joke demos I want to get the band to attack. Big Paul's got a few, Geordie's got a few. So we've got a lot of ideas. Whether we can engage jazz into those ideas and beyond, I don't know. We'll have to see. But I think because we've left it for a while, sometimes when we just like land on it, it just comes, and it's like, wow, we just have to plug in and stand in the room together. It just happens.
Wow.
I'm sure that may happen as well. We need a new album now, and it's important we do that. So I'm personally pushing for it and have been. And whether I don't know if that EP will be on it, but who knows?
Yeah. Martin, this has been so much fun and a real honor to talk to you. Like I said, I've been a Killing Joke fan for a better part of the whole run, and to spend some time with you has been a real thrill. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, and all the best with it. Yeah,
we appreciate it.
Well, have a good evening, and keep rocking those podcasts out, man. I really enjoy it. I watched one the other day that you do with your partner.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
A different show. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a different personality.
Yeah. Well, it is a little bit different. I'm focused on more things than just music. But yeah, we've been doing that. We've been doing this show for 28 years in Massachusetts. So good long time. Yeah, I know.
Wow. Well, I enjoyed it. And there was one I was listening to the other day. You were going on about the pros and cons of foot fetishes. I was like, and I actually just watched that Dusk to Dawn movie that Tarantino wrote, where he wrote amazing scene with Salma Hayek doing a strip, and he gets to have the foot fetish thing. And I think you were saying, I don't know about Fee, I don't get Fee. And I was like, you obviously haven't seen that scene recently. Because if you had, you'd be like, yeah. Right. But I thought it was really entertaining.
Well, thank you.
So thanks for having me. And yeah, best of luck with it.
Totally my pleasure. Good to meet you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Have a great night. So what we've learned is this: if Martin Glover can tell all his friends about the podcast, so can you. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, feel free to share it, like it, rate it, let everybody know about it. You can follow me on all the social media stuff and email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to know what you think. Thanks to Z&M Home Buyers for their support, and thank you for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.